Hello everyone, welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast intermission. It's the Shientist on the SupraTronix Intermission, and this intermission is going to it will be a sort of an audio podcast surrounding a sort of an overview in relating to laboratory tests, biomarkers, and investigations. Once again, this is a Storm Robotics production. So to begin with, I'm going to provide a sort of a basis, if you like, for in and around iron deficiency in context of particular sort of aspects of a particular sort of health condition. So so in this context, many patients or recipients out there who may be suspect or high risk for chronic kidney disease. And in context of biomarkers and the link in relating to anemia, serum transferrin saturation is a measure of or can be used as a measure of circulating iron, and transferrin is that sort of part of the molecule that allows a sort of a bond. So thus, there's also the biomarker, one of the biomarkers, or part of the sort of the interconnectivity or interconnection between transferrin, iron, and oxygen saturation. So a component or a marker that's referred to as hepcidin is one of the sort of main hormones responsible for maintaining systemic iron hemostasis. In context, as well, in following and sort of in aligned to this, at least from a sort of a degradative standpoint, I want to highlight a little bit around something that's referred to as a mineral and bone disease in context of CKD. And generally, or majority of CKD recipients are sort of are suspect or high risk of developing disease. And so in line with this, high calcium, for example, and high elevated or elevated phosphate sort of levels, and high or low parathyroid levels has been associated with increased mortality and maintenance forms of renal in line to forms of renal replacement therapy in sort of CKD in CKD patients. Parathyroid hormone, parathyroid hormone or and also a systematic disorder of mineral and bone metabolism due to CKD manifested by one or a combination can be identified through some of the other through the following sort of additional or sort of linked sort of challenges as well. So there can be abnormalities of calcium, phosphate, or and now I'm going to just highlight a bit of an elaboration around bone turnover markers, or bone turnover markers, or abbreviated here as BTMs, are generally classified as circulating factors and include measurement of parathyroid hormone and bone specific alkaline phosphatase. BTMs are important biomarkers that generally reflect changes in bone turnover more rapidly than changes in bone mineral density. Bone turnover markers, or BTMs, are also sort of subdivided into two particular categories. Excuse me. The markers of bone formation sort of can include something that's referred to as BALP and the N-terminal peptide of type 1 procollagen, or PINP, and markers of bone reabsorption. In context of biomarkers, perhaps more generally though, an ideal biomarker for monitoring the management of CKD and BD generally should be non-invasive and allow sort of a consistent measurements for specific analytes. Serum total alkaline phosphatase is a sort of a biomarker or a marker of osteoid formation and mineralization, and is generally another interesting biomarker, and is interesting it's intriguing in several ways, because this particular biomarker, something that's referred to as fibroblast growth factor 23, or FGF23, generally is in more recent literature and sort of published works, FGF23, as it's abbreviated, another biomarker is that has been sort of mentioned in the literature, works by Cavalier and Cavalier in 2018, is something that's referred to as sclerostin. As sclerostin has emerged to be to help better understand bone pathophysiology, and is considered as a sort of a biomarker and a sort of a protein responsible for the. I mentioned some aspects around the parathyroid hormone already, but as an sort of an overview, parathyroid hormone, or PTH, is a main regulator of bone remodeling, and PTH monitoring has been recommended in sort of various nephrology guidelines and various laboratory and pathology based guidelines as well. KDIGO recommend that PTH levels, parathyroid levels, are in those the forms of renal. A sort of an overview in context of carboxyl terminal cross-linked telopeptide of type 1 collagen, or CTX1. So CTX1 is a bone reabsorption sort of a marker or biomarker, and peptide fragments of collagen are released into the circulation when bone is reabsorbed. And CTX is cleared, is generally cleared by through renal physiology or renal pathophysiology. And just a few acknowledgements here. Colleagues who developed or co-developed this sort of overview And so there's a collaborative effort between an academic institution and between two other organizations, and so